Proverbs introduction. A proverb is a short saying that describes what life is like. Often this description contains an instruction or an implied instruction about how to live life well. Proverbs often summarize the wisdom of experience. They're written after careful observation of life and the world. The book of Proverbs, as its title suggests, contains many of these short sayings. And the standard proverb in the book of Proverbs is a couplet, a statement of two lines written poetically. And there are different types of couplets. Sometimes the second line says something in contrast to the first line. Sometimes the second line repeats the point of the first line. And sometimes the second line builds or expands on the first line. The title given to the book in the first verse is The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, King of Israel, which could be understood as a title for the first 9 chapters, but more likely is intended as a title for the entire book. Solomon seems to be the main contributor to this book of Proverbs. He was, of course, well known for his wisdom, and in Kings is described as having spoken 3,000 proverbs. Proverbs contains a number of collections. Much like the book of Psalms, we should think of this book as a collection of collections. In Proverbs 25 verse 1, for example, we see that this book, this collection, was still being put together in the time of King Hezekiah. That was about 700 BC, some 250 years after Solomon's reign. Most of the proverbs in this collection clearly originate with Solomon, but the final compilation of his proverbs with other proverbs to make the book as we know it today was obviously done much later. The book of Proverbs also includes the writings of other people, not just Solomon. In the final 2 chapters, we have the contributions of Agur, son of Jakeh, and King Lemuel. Now, we don't know anything about these 2 men, but it seems that at least one of them is a Gentile. He's a non-Jew. If you know your Old Testament history, you'll know that there is no King Lemuel listed as a king of Israel or Judah. So the book of Proverbs apparently contains contributions from both Jews and Gentiles, possibly from various times in Israel's history. The book of Proverbs describes wisdom and folly. It warns about laziness. It gives advice about money. It affirms friendship. It describes how we use our words. It speaks about married life and parenting. It discusses issues of life and death, and many more issues besides. Sometimes these proverbs use humour to expose the folly that we so often choose. But as I've already said in my introduction to the wisdom literature, the thing that makes this wisdom literature in Proverbs different to other wisdom literature at this time is the fact that it focuses on Yahweh. It focuses on the Lord. This isn't secular wisdom. Proverbs 1 verse 7 introduces the main theme of this collection. It says this: the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. True wisdom for life starts with a holy reverence for the living God, the God who's made this world by his divine power and wisdom. See, if that's not your starting point, then no amount of earthly wisdom is going to help you to live well. You'll just end up living like a fool. Look at the exercise on slide 1. Read Proverbs 26 verses 4 to 5. How can both of these proverbs be true? Please pause the video at this point so that you can answer the question. Do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you yourself will be just like him. Answer a fool according to his folly, or he will be wise in his own eyes. How can both of those proverbs be true? It seems as if the Bible is giving contradictory advice here in these two proverbs that sit next to one another in the book of Proverbs. How can both of them be true? Well, we need to remember what type of literature we're reading. These are proverbs. They make observations about life. They set out principles that we can live by. They're not laws given by God. They're not absolute divine promises. We're not meant to read these verses in the same way as we do the Ten Commandments, for example. Sometimes the proverbs are overstating things to illustrate the truth. Sometimes they make an observation about the way life is without clearly explaining which is right or which is wrong. And sometimes, as in this case, a proverb is only true in certain situations. It's not that Solomon was half asleep when he wrote these words, or he just made a mistake. No, what he's saying is this: how you answer a fool depends on the situation. Sometimes you shouldn't dignify their nonsense with a response, he says. To be drawn into their foolishness is to act like a fool yourself. But at other times, you need to expose the emptiness of their arguments so that they realize that they're talking nonsense. You see, the wisdom comes in knowing when to speak and when not to. We mustn't think of Proverbs as divine promises that are true in every situation of our lives. Rather, we must think of them as true observations about life that time and experience will show to be true. And by the way, we mustn't make the mistake of thinking that what we find in this book is just good advice that we can take or leave. Remember where these proverbs are found. They're found in the Bible. They're found in God's Word. They come with all the authority of God Himself. They're true. They're words to remember. They're words to apply to our own lives. They're words to live by. An outline of Proverbs. First, we have the title, introduction, and motto about the fear of the Lord being the beginning of knowledge, chapter 1, verses 1 to 7. Then we have fatherly instruction to his son in a father's praise of wisdom, chapter 1:8 through to chapter 9, verse 18. Then we have a collection of couplets from Solomon, Proverbs of Solomon, chapter 10, verse 1 through to chapter 22, verse 16. Then we have 30 sayings from some unnamed wise men, so words of wise men, chapter 22:17 through to chapter 24, verse 22. Followed by another short section, further words of wise men, chapter 24, verses 23 to 34. Then another collection of Solomon's Proverbs, so further Proverbs of Solomon, Hezekiah's collection, chapter 25, verse 1 through to chapter 29, verse 27. Then the words of Agur, chapter 30, verses 1 to 33, and the words of King Lemuel, chapter 31, verses 1 to 9. Finishing with an acrostic poem, an alphabet of wifely excellence, chapter 31, verses 10 to 31. Well, finally, the importance of this book of Proverbs for Christians. Apart from the fact that a number of these proverbs are quoted in the New Testament for our benefit, in general terms, this Old Testament book helps us as Christians to know how to make wise choices in life. It's full of helpful instruction about how to live well in God's world. It reminds us at the outset that living well depends on an understanding of where we fit into God's world. Proverbs tells us that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Proverbs also shows us that living right involves the whole of our lives. This book touches on almost every aspect of everyday life. It shows us that being a Christian is about an entire lifestyle and not just about attending church on a Sunday. Proverbs, like the rest of the wisdom literature, shows us that there are two ways to live. A person can choose to follow wisdom, or they can choose folly. In the New Testament, Jesus is described as God's wisdom, as we've already seen. And the choice that we all face is, will we choose God's wisdom in Jesus Christ or not? In Romans chapter 1, the Apostle Paul writes about how foolish it is to worship the things God has made, rather than worshipping the God who has made all things. But so many today make exactly that foolish choice. Their lives revolve around their things, rather than the God who holds their eternal destiny in his hands. True wisdom, however, the Bible tells us, is found in following Christ.